Again, thank you very, very much. I was excited to be giving this talk, and thank you for inviting me today. I was a little nervous at the opening ceremonies because I thought I was going to have to do this using interpretive dance, and that would have ended really bad for me, I think. Okay, so we'll get on to serious stuff. So I'm the executive director of the Alfred Mann Institute for Biomedical Engineering at USC, which was a gift from Al Mann. He passed away last year at 90 years of age. Al was a serial entrepreneur in the medical device world. He was truly the 800-pound gorilla. He had developed all the things that were just mentioned and made a lot of money in the process and said that when his results exceeded his expectations, he wanted to give back. So one of the ways that Al did give back was to create this institute at USC, which has an endowment now of about $180 million, which allows us to have an operating budget that allows us to do technology development at first in medical devices, but now we've broadened it out for life sciences. And so our real mission is to try to help researchers at USC to move their ideas from the bench all the way. Thank you. Thanks very much. Excuse me for that. Is to move ideas from the laboratory bench out to the marketplace. So we're not an academic department, and we're not a for-profit company. We're this hybrid bridging organization that does translation. And so we work with the best and brightest at USC, and across not just medical devices, but stem cells, other areas of life sciences, diagnostics, microbiome. We're in areas of chemistry, biology. We go to the medical school. We're in engineering, pharmacy, dentistry, all across the university, and look to work with people who have developed their technology to a point where we can actually add some value. So we'll build boxes, or we'll pay for early stage clinical studies, file patents, do market analysis, and attempt to take things along so that we can either put it into a large company's pipelines or to spin it out as a startup company. So what I'm going to tell you a little bit about today is how we do that, what our team looks like. I'll tell you some success stories that we've had, and as the spoiler alert, at the end I'll tell you why some of our success stories weren't such success stories if you go back a little bit further in time. So I'll give you the hidden stuff. So we also have a cross-disciplinary team. We have chemists, biologists, engineers, clinicians, and patent attorneys, regulatory experts, business development experts, just a wide range of people that work together. Okay, so our secret, I think, is really that we use a pull model. So the pull model has three parts to it. First, what we really seek to do is when we find an idea that we're really interested in, we start to ask questions about clinical needs and market needs. And so really the sort of blunt way of saying this is, does anybody really need this? Not just is it neat technology, but what's the need? What does that mean from a financial end? What does it mean from the need of the docs? What does it mean from the needs of patients? What about who's going to pay for this? What's the reimbursement look like? How competitive is this? Is this just a minor derivative invention that's really not worth spending years to develop it and then file patents and then also go through the regulatory process? or is this really something that could add a lot of value? So that's the first thing, is what's the need? The second thing that we look at is, can we own it? In other words, what are the assets that we can develop? Does somebody already have the patents to these? Do we need to do cross-licensing? Can we file patent applications? Because if we're going to spend a lot of resources, financial and otherwise, to develop the technology, we're going to want to own the product and be able to launch it. And then the third thing, excuse me, is the technology robust enough to launch into a commercial product? So I started my career as a chemist, and I learned that I could make things work in the laboratory hood one time pretty easily, but if I had to manufacture 1 million copies of this and it wasn't up to me to control it, that's a whole different kind of need. And so we really look for robust technologies that we can commercialize. Now, the pull model doesn't mean that we have to have perfect answers to all three of those areas in order to start down a path. It's really about a way of thinking. You see, when you start to do technology development, if you don't think about those things early on, you're going to get unpleasant surprises when you get to them because they're on the roadmap to success. So our team is really a really good team for solving problems. That's what they do. So we think about these issues early on, and we keep adjusting to try to meet the problems and the challenges that come up with this. So it's a thought process, not a sort of grading tool. Okay. So here's our approach that we use in order to try to do some analysis and to move the technology along. If you look at the first one, we talk about conducting due diligence. That means different things to different people, but what I found in roughly 40 years of my own personal technology development journey is that all of us are comfortable doing secondary market research. Okay, so secondary market research is sitting at your desk in front of your computer screen, looking up things on Wikipedia, Googling things, getting library information, getting reports that other people wrote. That's very useful for getting quick answers as to whether or not you want to work in a particular area. But what we focus on is what's called primary market research. And that's harder because you actually have to get out from behind your desk and go talk to humans, which can be a bit challenging sometimes because especially if you're trying to talk to physicians who are very busy and don't have a lot of time to spare, you'll get the door slammed in your face a lot. So you have to really develop a thick skin, and you have to be persistent because the primary market research from clinicians, from payers, from patients, from competitors helps you to really understand what's currently going on in the market and helps you make the best decisions on your way forward with your technology development. So we use a lot of primary market research, and sometimes the gap between secondary market research and primary market research is the gap where a project can get killed because again, you can find a lot of things surfing the internet that would indicate you should move forward, but when you actually start to talk about clinical needs, sometimes you realize the product that you're aiming for needs to be adjusted, or it's just not that important. As I mentioned earlier, we collaborate within the USC ecosystem across the whole university in different schools with the best and brightest. Our parallel processing point is really to say that we don't do things in series. We work on the technology development at the same time that we're working on the business development. So our team is cross-discipline, multifaceted, works across projects, and while some of the team is working on the science and technology, engineering, clinical parts, other people are out there talking to potential investors and the financial structures that we would need in order to spin something out. And the last one, the exit, the best way I could describe us when it comes to our exits is opportunistic. So no two of our programs look alike. We do whatever we need to do to launch these things out. It's for us, as a not-for-profit institute, it's not so much about making money. It's about getting technologies out there to do good, to provide goods and services for people who need our healthcare solutions. And so sometimes we work with venture capitalists, sometimes it's investment bankers, sometimes it's angels, and I'll talk specifically on a couple of these. Okay. So, as I mentioned, we have a lot of different folks in the shop. We're really not that big. We have about 20 permanent employees and 6 entrepreneurs in residence. The 6 entrepreneurs in residence have a variety of backgrounds, from having run small to medium-sized life science companies. Some of them have done investment banking. They're sort of later stage, very successful people who have are able to guide our internal team forward, and they have extensive networks in raising capital and in large pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies. So that helps us to build alliances. Our internal team, again, is a mix of people, again, biologists, chemists, engineers, attorneys, biz dev folks. We cross-train people. So a lot of our technical people go on to get executive MBAs while they're at USC, and they get other degrees so that they can bridge in different directions. This is really important. It not only builds their confidence to understand larger parts of the project, but it gives them opportunities to help the Institute in other areas, and it keeps it pretty fresh and interesting for them. When we launch a product or a project out, people don't lose their jobs, okay? So that's an important thing. There are so many different projects now that they're cross-trained on, that the launching of one out only means that they'll be working on other projects. So that's an incentive for them to move things out. I'll tell you about another incentive in a couple minutes. So USC has about $700 million in research, government research funds that come in, and that's a pool that we can draw from. So again, the life science pool is large, and so that's why we only selected USC now. About 10 years ago when I joined the Institute, we were kind of stalled out, and we were only working on electronics-related things. And so we restructured the Institute, downsized, then upsized it again, but changed the whole culture so that we could have a broader scope. And so in the beginning, we looked at everything and anything. Now we're very selective, and back 10 years ago, we had 3 projects that were stalled, and I'll tell you why later on, why they were stalled. Today we have 15 projects. No, thank you. Sorry, I'm at the tail end of a cold. So here's one of our success stories. This one's important for you to pay attention to, if any of them are, only because I'm going to come back to it later and tell you the truth, okay? But right now, I'm just going to tell you the good part, okay? So this was technology, sorry, that came from the electrical engineering department, Professor Gunderson. Professor Gunderson works on pulse power, and that's high voltage, short pulses that are used in the combustion industry. So it's used for engines, for planes, for trucks, for marine purposes. It's used in drones. And a number of years ago, he came to our institute and said, one of my colleagues at the Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and I were working together on this, and we think that we could use this technology for treating skin cancers and internal tumors. So we started down this path to develop the technology, and we built boxes and all sorts of things. And in 2012, we created a startup called Theliopulse, which we took technology from Old Dominion University and from our institute in USC and rolled them together. We did some more work, and in 2014, we went out to raise the first round for the company that was not our institute's money. It was private angel investors. We wanted to raise $4 to $8 million, and we did 2 days, one in Los Angeles and one in Dallas, and at the end, we were oversubscribed to $11 million, so we had to turn away $3 million. So that was successful. So far we sound pretty smart, but remember, I'm coming back to this later, okay? In 2016, we took the company public, and it had a IPO valuation of $50 million. And depending on what the stock price is doing on a daily basis, it's somewhere around 450 million plus or minus. So for us, that was great because, again, it's not so much about the money. The technology got launched. There's a company up in the Bay Area that has the responsibility for developing the technology for internal tumors and skin lesions. They just filed a 510K for a skin lesion product. So they're doing well, and they have plenty of capital. And it's out of our institute. The bird has left the nest, and we're on to other things. But again, I'll come back to this one later and tell you some other stories with this. Another one that we did, which was really great, was called Viracto. It's an ophthalmology device. And so the previous one I just told you was angel investors and then an investment bankers helping us take it public. This one, we took the technology that was brought over from Caltech when one of the scientists from Caltech moved over to USC, and we took it into our shop. It was in there for 9 months, and we spent $750,000 to build a prototype device. And when we did that, we were able to raise $10 million total in private equity from China. $5.5 million of it went to forming a company called Viracto, which is in Orange, California. $4.5 million is in China to do the manufacturing part in the sister company. And in a relatively short time, we were able to develop the clinical units from California, send them over to China for testing. They did clinical studies. It went into the Chinese FDA, and it recently received approval, and it's being sold in China. And the technology is a really useful platform, not just for ophthalmology, but for some other diseases. But this one was for treating problems related to bleeding in the retina. So people with diabetic retinopathy, in other words, people with diabetes, often have problems with their vision because of problems with the retina, and they need to go see an ophthalmologist a lot. And people with wet age-related macular degeneration also have retinal problems, and they need to go see an ophthalmologist a lot. And the best way to do retinal angiography till this came along was through an invasive approach. And our approach allows you to do it non-invasively, which means it can be in optometrist's office, minute clinics, and places like that, which is a good thing because people with these diseases need to be able to get this kind of help or diagnoses frequently, and they'll do it if it's easier to do it, and they don't have to set up an ophthalmologist appointment and go through a whole procedure. So this will probably help a lot of people keep their sight. The next one is we had a, okay, the next one, God doesn't like my talk. Okay. Is that me? No? No. Maybe not. Okay. Maybe so. Let's see if we can. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. So the next one was some medical tools, medical devices, simple ones that came out of the work of a family physician who passed away a few years ago, but was a very prolific inventor. And so what he did is he came up with a lot of devices that family physicians, general practitioners could use that would help them to do their job better. And so we spun out a company called Biomedical, and its first product, which got patent coverage and a 510K allowed, and is being distributed now to hospitals in the United States, is an obstetric retractor which goes in the birth canal, and it helps the physician to repair tears during childbirth. And what's different about this is it has a ratchet assembly, and it also has an LED light inside it, which obviously previous versions of these things, they didn't have that. And so it frees up having to have another medical person there to hold things open and hold lights. So it's an improvement that lets physicians be much more efficient. Okay. And so we've got a whole pipeline of these kinds of products in this company. Okay. So our pipeline of current programs would be thermally reversible adhesives. Is another project that we have. That's a bandage that if it's put on fragile skin, when we go to take it off, it doesn't tear the skin. You just put a cold pack on it, and the adhesive property goes away, and it's easy to remove. So that's good for the elderly or burn victims, things like that. The Biothelium is a stent project where we started out with some University of California, San Francisco technology in a collaboration and developed a new topology for the metals. It's a different kind of metal coating that lets us have lower restenosis, which is a closing up again, or thrombosis, which is clot forming problems below the knee, and that's a real big problem for people with diabetes and other age problems. When they have problems with blood flow below the knee, 35% of them ultimately end up with an amputation. So this is an important product for us. The next two are stem cell projects. One of them is focused on creating therapeutics for lupus, and the other one is actually for bone repair. Both of them came out of the dental school. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of other projects. Sorry for this. Okay. So what are the lessons learned? Well, our early projects were okay from a science and technology, engineering, clinical use standpoint, but they never got out of the Institute. They just perambulated for years and didn't make it out. And part of the problem is that they started as push models, okay? So at the beginning of my career as a chemist, when I worked at the bench making molecules, that's all I used was push models. So a push model is really simple to understand. It's the, if I make it, they will come. And I always tell students when I'm talking to them about this, if you build it, they may come, but they may not buy. Okay, so just because you made it and you're excited about it doesn't mean there's a market for it. And so that's the problem with the push model. It's like pushing on a rope, and the failure rate is extremely high. So we shifted to the pull model, which I went through, and we've had better luck. We feel more confident in what we're doing. It's still no guarantee because it's a long, hard process to get from the bench to the marketplace, whether it's, and your problems can come up in technology or business. They're dynamic landscapes. And so you really are trying to improve your odds, but there's no guarantee. There was also not a whole lot of incentive back 10 years ago to launch things out. And the reason for that is we had such a narrow scope of projects, and they were all electronics related, that if you launched something out, people had reason to suspect they would lose their jobs if their project went away. And so that was not a motivator to pop things out. Instead, it's a motivator to do more stuff. And so the stuff that we did was, we built electronics boxes, and we focused on quality and regulatory issues and things like that, but we didn't focus on finding investors and forming startups and finding what investors wanted and what clinicians wanted, because there wasn't a lot of drive to get things out. So we changed all that. One of the things that we did is we made it so that every time we spin out a company, everyone in the Institute, except me, I'll come back to that in a second, everyone in the Institute gets stock in the companies. So the reason I don't get stock in the companies is because I'm the one who makes the decisions about who's going to get stock in the companies. And so it's a conflict of interest if I take stock. And my board meets once a year. So and they don't know everyone in the Institute. And so as a consequence, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to take my cap table to the board and say, should I give this person 10,000 shares or 5,000 shares? They wouldn't be able to answer that question. The fact that everybody gets equity in these companies, we find that they're motivated, because they're all owners now in the company, to try to launch them out. And so everybody in the Institute at the time had stock in Pulse, and nobody's going to retire super wealthy from this, but they're nice little spiffs, and they incentivize people to move them out. And then the cross-discipline, cross-training stuff is exceptionally important, because people know that they can work on multiple projects, so they don't worry about losing their job if one of them launches out, because there's other ones to work on. So that's really important. You have to make sure that people are properly incentivized to launch things out and not punished by that. Okay. So I told you I would tell you the truth about this one. So note that the timeline starts at 2012, but the project actually started around 2007, and it started as a push model. The people that started it were excited about it, but they just built boxes, and they built good boxes, and they built better boxes that performed better. The boards didn't blow out and things like that. And they added more and more people to the project that could do quality assurance. So in an institute our size, which today has 20 employees and 6 entrepreneurs in residence, at one time we had 11 people working on quality for this, but we weren't anywhere near commercializing it or launching it. So you can see there's a real disconnect with reality. So that's the reality of this stuff. Push models without proper incentives lead to things getting sort of stuck in your pipeline, which chews up your money and doesn't allow you to do other things. And our model now is about high throughput, trying to get as many projects through as possible, because not all of them will be successful, but the more stuff we get out there, the more people we can help. Okay, so we try to do right sizing, which means that we don't take on projects that require things that are way beyond our budget to do. We try to figure out, you know, if we can start something that's, you know, a few $100,000 a year for several years is probably in the right framework. It might ramp up to $1 million a year for a few years before it gets launched out, but that's about it. If I need $50 million worth of seed funding for this project, I'm probably not going to do that. So we're trying to figure out what our resource needs are. We always try to make sure we come in within our budget, because oftentimes the people that follow what we're doing are board members. They don't know the technical details, but everybody knows how to excuse me, everybody knows how to do arithmetic. And if you keep missing your budget, people are going to say, well, if you're not able to manage your money, maybe you're not able to manage other things. So it's always important to non-technical people to make sure you can manage the budgets properly. I'll leave it at that for this slide. The reduced fear of failure. So we throw a lot of stuff up at the wall to see what sticks, and it doesn't all stick. We're really lucky. We have a board that's a combination from USC senior management and Mann's world, and they've been really flexible with us as we try to work our way to a system that is more successful. But you have to let people have setbacks along the way and learn from them, or they can't advance. Okay. And I think that's about it. Yeah, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. So the answer, I think, to this is that we'll use a little bit of money, maybe up to $100,000 in an exploratory mode for a project. And some of that's in cash outlays, but a lot of it's just sort of inside sweat equity. So some of the team members will either take a homegrown idea because they're really smart people and they're capable of generating their own ideas, or they'll work with top researchers at USC to probe an idea and then go out and get market analysis and IP, intellectual property landscape analysis done and things like that. So a lot of this stuff is in parallel. It doesn't all happen in one day. Who and how assesses the market needs? That's a team sport. Again, it depends, you know, who needs to be involved. In the old days, we used to drag the whole institute into meetings where we would look at every idea that we got. We don't do that now. It's a much smaller group that's really specific for each project. It's a more efficient use of our bandwidth not to drag everybody into them. Okay? Did I answer that one okay for you guys? No, not anymore. We did in the beginning because we were trying to figure out what to do. USC was in the process of adding a lot of transformational faculty, and they've already done a lot of that. And we broadened our domain so that we have a really large opportunity base at USC. So that's really where our focus is. The stents project, the biothelium one, came from UCSF a number of years ago when we were still exploring what was around USC and what was outside of USC. And actually, we wanted to know what was going on globally at competitive universities. And so at one time, we left the door open to anybody and anyone that wanted to come in and talk to us, but we can't do that now. So the question is, can I pinpoint some of the factors that stand behind Mann's success? So Al was a very, very smart person. He also did something that you don't really see too many people do, and that was he was a real marathoner when most of us, I think, are sprinters. Al, when he was committed to something, when he believed in it, he stayed with it for years and put a lot of his own capital to work in that. And so he would put in hundreds of millions or even in some of them $1 billion of his own personal capital to back these companies. Not everyone was successful, but Al was very, very tenacious and very, very smart. He was also, besides being a really smart technologist, he was a very smart businessman. Yes. That's true. Yeah, well, again, that goes back, excuse me, to the primary market research point about before you get too deep into these things, you should be out there talking to clinicians and understanding their needs and patients' needs. The way we look at it now is we try to figure out how we're going to get out of these things or launch them before we get too deep into them, and that helps. Okay. Thank you very much.